The galaxy had never loved humanity, and humanity had always known it. 80 years had passed since the first human ship stumbled through a hyperspace rift and found itself surrounded by the warships of the Galactic Concord, a governing body of over 4,000 alien species that had ruled the stars for longer than human civilization had existed. They did not fire, but they did not welcome either. They studied humanity the way a biologist studies a new insect, with cold curiosity and mild disgust. The Concord classified Earth as a Tier 9 primitive civilization, the lowest rank any spacefaring species could receive, and they granted humanity a single seat in the assembly, buried in the back rows where no one of importance ever sat. For 80 years, humanity accepted this quietly. They traded fairly, they followed the rules, and they sent their very best to represent them among the stars. A woman named Alara Mbanke. Ambassador Mbanke was not a warrior, not a general, not a spy. She was a teacher before she became a diplomat, a woman from a coastal village in West Africa who had spent her childhood telling stories under the open sky. She had a voice that could calm a room full of screaming politicians, and a smile that made even the most suspicious alien species lower their guard. For 22 years she had served as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Concord. 22 years of patience, of swallowed pride, of sitting in that back row seat and raising her hand politely while species with 1,000 times more power spoke over her. 22 years of slowly, carefully, stubbornly building bridges. And it had worked. Not in the grand dramatic way that stories usually tell, but in the small quiet ways that actually change the universe. She negotiated trade agreements that brought alien medicine to human colonies and human art to alien worlds. She brokered peace between two species that had been at war for centuries, simply by sitting in a room with both of them for 14 hours and refusing to leave until they shook hands. She convinced the Concord to allow human students into their universities and alien scholars into Earth's libraries. Slowly, humanity began to matter. And that was the problem. High Sovereign Vorath Zelun had ruled the Concord's inner circle for 300 years. He was a Thesserai, a tall reptilian species with scales the color of dark iron and eyes like frozen amber. He had watched empires rise and crumble, had crushed rebellions with a flick of his clawed hand, and had maintained the Concord's rigid hierarchy with absolute precision. Every species had its place, and every place had its species. That was the natural order. Humans did not fit the natural order. They were too fast, too adaptable, too creative, and worst of all, too likable. In just 80 years, human music played in alien markets. Human philosophy was debated in alien academies, and human idioms had crept into a dozen alien languages. 3 species had restructured their governments based on human democratic models. 5 more had requested permanent cultural exchanges. The Karath Collective, an insectoid hive mind species that had never shown interest in any other culture, had begun collecting human paintings. Zelun watched all of this from his throne on Thessera Prime, and what he felt was not admiration. It was fear. He convened the inner circle in secret, the 12 most powerful species leaders in the galaxy, the ones who truly controlled the Concord behind its facade of democracy. He stood before them in the dim war chamber, his claws clicking against the stone floor. "They are a mimetic parasite," he said, his voice a low growl that echoed off the ancient walls. "They do not conquer with weapons, they conquer with ideas, and ideas are far more dangerous than any warship, because you cannot shoot an idea out of the sky." The inner circle listened. Some agreed immediately. The Vrelok's dominion had lost significant trade revenue to human merchants, and the Dravathi Empire resented that their youth were wearing human clothing and listening to human music. Others were hesitant. The Pelori ambassador, a gentle aquatic species, raised a tentacle and asked what exactly Zelen proposed. Zelen's answer was simple. "We remove their voice," he said. "We remove their ambassador, we revoke their membership, and we contain them in their little corner of the galaxy before they spread any further." "Remove," the Pelori repeated. "You mean kill?" Zelen did not blink. "I mean remove." The vote was 8-4. The four who voted against it, the Pelori, the Athkari, the Luminari, and the Jorath, were told to keep silent or face consequences. Made. Ambassador Elara Mbanke would be summoned to a diplomatic summit on Thesara Prime. She would not leave alive. Far away, on Earth, in a building with no name and no windows buried deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland, Director Yuna Tanaka sat in a room full of screens and silence. Tanaka was the head of the Office of Contingency Operations, a branch of the human government so classified that even most world leaders did not know it existed. She was a small woman with silver hair and steady hands, who had not raised her voice in 30 years because she had never needed to. Her job was simple: to plan for the worst day in human history, and to make sure that if it ever came, humanity would survive it. She had built something called Order 66. It was not a battle plan. It was not a weapon. It was a promise. A promise that if the galaxy ever decided to destroy the hand that humanity had extended in peace, then humanity would show the galaxy its other hand. And that hand was a fist. Tanaka stared at the screens, showing Ambassador Mbanke's shuttle, departing for Thesara Prime. She had a feeling in her gut, the kind of feeling that had kept her alive through 3 intelligence wars and 2 assassination attempts. She picked up a secure communicator and called Admiral Cale Draven, commander of the United Stellar Navy. Draven answered from the bridge of the USN Erebus, the largest warship humanity had ever built, though the galaxy did not know it existed. "She is going to Thesara Prime," Tanaka said quietly. "I know," Draven replied. "I have a bad feeling about this one, Cale." There was a long pause. "So do I," Draven said. "How ready are we?" Tanaka looked at her screens, thousands of green indicators scattered across a map of the galaxy, each one representing a hidden asset, a sleeper program, a weapon cache, a contingency that had been quietly put in place over 60 years of careful, paranoid preparation. "We have been ready for a long time," she said. "Then we wait," Draven said, "and we hope that woman does what she has always done. She makes them listen." On Thesara Prime, the great halls of the Concord Assembly gleamed under the light of 3 artificial suns. Delegations from hundreds of species filed into their seats, filling the enormous chamber with 1,000 different languages, and the rustle of wings and scales and fabric. Ambassador Mbanke stepped off her shuttle and onto the polished floor of the docking bay. Her security detail, 4 human soldiers in dress uniforms, flanked her on either side. She looked up at the towering spires of the station, took a deep breath, and smiled. She had walked into hostile rooms before. She had always walked out. She adjusted the silver pin on her collar, a small Earth, no bigger than a thumbnail, and began walking toward the assembly hall. Behind her, the shuttle doors closed. Above her, hidden in the observation galleries, Vorath Selen watched her approach with cold amber eyes. The trap was set. The lamb was walking in, and the wolves were already sharpening their teeth. The assembly hall of Thesara Prime could hold 10,000 beings, and on this day every seat was filled. Species of every shape and size sat in their designated sections. The insectoid Karath clicking softly in their cluster. The aquatic Pelori floating in their gravity-suspended water spheres. The massive stone-skinned Dravathi sitting like boulders in reinforced chairs, and hundreds of others that humanity had spent 80 years learning to understand. Ambassador Elara Mbanke stood at the central podium, a small human figure surrounded by a sea of alien faces. She did not look afraid. She never looked afraid. The summit had been called under the pretense of discussing new trade regulations, but Mbanke had prepared a different kind of speech. One about the future, about cooperation, about what humanity and the galaxy could build together if they stopped treating each other as threats and started treating each other as neighbors. Speaking, and as always, the room listened. That was her gift. Not power, not wealth, not military might, but the simple ability to make a room full of people who hated each other actually stop and listen. "We came to you 80 years ago as strangers," she said, her voice warm and steady. "We were frightened and small, and we did not understand your ways. But we learned, and we grew, and we tried to give back more than we took, because that is what good neighbors do." She paused and looked around the room. "I know that some of you fear us. I know that our growth has been fast, and our ways are strange to many of you. But I stand here today to tell you that humanity does not want to replace anyone at this table. We simply want to sit at it, as equals, as partners, as friends." In the observation gallery above, Vorath Zelun pressed a button on a small device hidden in his clawed hand. A shimmer of blue energy erupted around the podium, forming a perfect barrier between Mbanke and her 4 security guards. The guards reacted instantly, reaching for their weapons, but a squad of Concord enforcers, heavily armed soldiers loyal only to the inner circle, emerged from hidden alcoves and pinned them to the ground. The assembly erupted in confusion. Mbanke did not scream. She looked at the energy barrier, then looked up at the gallery where Zelun stood watching. She understood. She had always known it was possible. She had told Director Tanaka as much before she left Earth. But she had come anyway because she believed that showing up was the most important thing a diplomat could do. Zelun descended from the gallery on a hovering platform, his iron scales gleaming, his amber eyes fixed on the small human woman trapped behind the barrier. "Ambassador Mbanke," he said, his voice amplified across the entire hall, "you are hereby charged with espionage, cultural subversion, and conspiracy against the stability of the Galactic Concord. Your species is a threat to the natural order, and this assembly has determined that the threat must be contained. This assembly," Mbanke said calmly, "or your inner circle." Zelun's eye twitched, but he continued. "Humanity's membership in the Concord is revoked effective immediately. All human colonies will submit to containment protocols, and any resistance will be met with the full force of the Concord Armada." Mbanke shook her head slowly. "You are making a terrible mistake, Vorath," she said, and there was no anger in her voice, only sadness, deep and heavy. "You do not know what you are about to wake up." Zelun gave a small nod to the enforcer standing inside the barrier. The soldier raised his weapon. Mbanke touched the small silver earth pinned to her collar. She closed her eyes. The shot was clean and instant. Ambassador Alara Mbanke, the woman who had spent 22 years trying to teach the galaxy that humanity was worth knowing, fell to the floor of the assembly hall and did not move again. The broadcast feed, which had been streaming to every inhabited world in the galaxy, as all summit proceedings were, captured everything, every moment, every word, every frame. 4,000 species watched it happen. 800 billion beings across the galaxy saw it live. And on Earth, 9 billion humans saw it too. The reaction on Earth was not what the Concord expected. Zelun had anticipated outrage, riots, protests, angry transmissions, desperate pleas for negotiation. He had prepared a response for all of these. What he got instead was silence. No transmissions came from Earth. No angry messages flooded the Concord channels. No human diplomats demanded emergency sessions. Just silence. Vast and absolute and terrifying in a way that Zelun could not quite explain. Of Switzerland, Director Yuna Tanaka watched the feed on her screens. She watched the barrier go up. She watched the speech. She watched the shot. She watched Ilara Mbanke, a woman she had known for 15 years, a woman she had shared tea with just last month, a woman who had once convinced Tanaka herself that peace was worth fighting for. She watched her die on a cold alien floor, surrounded by beings who were not worthy of her kindness. Tanaka's hands did not shake. Her voice did not crack. She reached for the console in front of her, and entered a code that she had memorized 20 years ago, and had prayed every single day she would never have to use. The system responded with a single confirmation prompt. She pressed it. Across 300 light-years of space, every human military installation, every colony defense grid, every deep space listening post, every hidden weapons cache, every sleeper satellite, and every classified asset that the Office of Contingency Operations had spent 6 decades secretly placing throughout the galaxy, received the same transmission at the same moment. It was not encrypted because it did not need to be. By the time anyone decoded it, it would already be too late. The message was simple. Contingency verified. Ambassador signal lost. Initiating Order 66. On the bridge of the USN Erebus, Admiral Cale Draven heard the alert chime. He looked at the screen. He read the words. He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds, not because he needed to think, but because he needed to say goodbye to the man he had been before this moment. Because the man who opened his eyes would have to be someone harder, someone colder, someone capable of doing what came next. He opened his eyes. Around him, his bridge crew stared at their screens in silence. Every one of them had trained for this, had drilled for this, had hoped with every fiber of their being that this day would never come. But it had come, and they were ready. Draven pressed the fleet-wide communication channel. His voice was granite, flat and heavy and absolutely without mercy. All fleets, all stations, Order 66 is live. Ambassador Mbanki has been killed. The Concord has chosen war. They will not get the war they expected. He paused for one breath. Activate all contingency packages. Deploy all hidden assets. Execute all pre-assigned targets. We go dark in 30 minutes, and we do not stop until the galaxy understands that killing the person we sent to talk was the last mistake they will ever make. He closed the channel. Across the galaxy, in nebulae and asteroid fields and dead systems, and the dark spaces between stars, ships that had been sleeping for years began to wake up. Satellites that had been drifting as harmless debris powered on and aimed themselves at targets they had been assigned a decade ago. Software buried deep inside alien computer systems. Systems that ran on technology humanity had so generously shared, began executing commands that no alien engineer had ever known were there. On 100 alien worlds, human-designed power reactors that had been sold as gifts of friendship began to hum at frequencies they were never supposed to reach. The galaxy had killed Earth's voice of peace. Now it would hear the other voice, the one that humanity had kept hidden behind closed doors and kind smiles and generous trade deals for 60 years. The voice that did not ask, the voice that did not negotiate, the voice that simply said, "You should not have done that." On Thessara Prime, Vorath Selim stood over the body of Ambassador Mbanke and addressed the assembly with triumph in his cold amber eyes. "The human problem is solved," he declared. "Their ambassador is dead, their membership is revoked, and their little civilization will be contained within a generation. The natural order is preserved." The assembly applauded. Most of them, anyway. The Pelori ambassador did not applaud. She floated in her water sphere and stared at the body on the floor, and felt something that her species rarely felt. Dread. Because she had studied humans more carefully than most. And she knew something that Zaloon did not. Humans did not get loud when they were angry. They got quiet. And right now, Earth was the quietest it had ever been. Order 66 was not born from hatred. It was born from a Tuesday afternoon 63 years ago, when a young intelligence analyst named Yuna Tanaka sat in a classified briefing and listened to a Concord admiral casually suggest that humanity's home system should be sterilized if humans ever became inconvenient. The Admiral did not know a human was listening. Tanaka never forgot the way he said it, the same tone a person might use when discussing pest control. She went home that night and began writing. What she wrote over the next 4 decades, with the help of thousands of the most brilliant and most paranoid minds humanity had ever produced, was not a war plan. It was a machine designed to do one thing, to make absolutely certain that if the galaxy ever turned on humanity, the galaxy would regret it before humanity even fired a single shot. The machine had 3 phases, and each phase was worse than the last. Was called Dark Hand, and it activated in the first 60 minutes after the order was given. For 80 years, humanity had been the galaxy's most generous trading partner. They shared medical technology that cured diseases across 100 worlds. They built communication relays that connected distant colonies. They designed power reactors that were cleaner and more efficient than anything the Concorde had ever produced. They did all of this with a smile and an open hand, and the galaxy took it gratefully, and never once asked the most important question: why were the humans being so generous? The answer was now tearing the galaxy apart. Every piece of technology that humanity had traded, gifted, or sold to alien civilizations over the past 6 decades contained something hidden. Not weapons, not bombs, but backdoors, kill switches, and dormant programs that had been sleeping patiently inside alien systems like seeds buried in frozen soil. The soil was thawing. Across the galaxy, communication relays that ran on human-designed software began fragmenting. They did not shut down completely. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they scrambled routing protocols, introduced cascading delays, and created information loops that made it impossible for the Concorde to coordinate anything larger than a local transmission. The Concorde Armada, the most powerful military force in galactic history, a coalition of 4,000 species with millions of warships, suddenly could not talk to itself. Fleet commanders sent orders that arrived hours late or not at all. Admirals tried to coordinate defensive formations and received garbled nonsense in return. Emergency channels filled with static and echoes of conversations that had happened 3 days ago. In the first hour, the Concorde military went from a unified fighting force to 4,000 separate navies, each one isolated and confused, unable to reach anyone who could tell them what was happening. At the same time, human-designed power reactors on alien worlds began behaving strangely. Some ran hot, forcing emergency shutdowns that plunged cities into darkness. Others emitted electromagnetic pulses that fried nearby electronics. A few simply stopped working, and the species that had become dependent on them discovered in the worst possible way that they had forgotten how to run their own power grids. Phase 2 was called Iron Veil, and it began within hours. The galaxy's hyperspace network was its lifeblood, a vast system of naturally occurring corridors through folded space that allowed ships to cross hundreds of light years in days instead of centuries. There were thousands of these corridors, but they all funneled through a relatively small number of critical junctions. 14 points in space where multiple corridors intersected like a highway interchange. Controlled those 14 junctions, controlled the movement of every ship in the galaxy. For years, the Concorde had stationed token defense fleets at these junctions, but they had never considered them serious strategic targets because no one had ever tried to take them. There was no need, since the Concorde controlled everything anyway. They did not know that humanity had been hiding entire fleets in the dark spaces near those junctions for over a decade. These were not small patrol groups. These were full battle fleets, dozens of warships each, powered down and drifting in the cold between the stars, crewed by soldiers who had volunteered for years-long deployments in absolute darkness and silence, waiting for a signal that they hoped would never come. The signal came, and they moved. Within 12 hours, all 14 hyperspace junctions were under human control. The galaxy's highway system was shut down. Colonies in 3 days were now looking at journeys of 6 months through normal space. And normal space was vast and empty, and offered no protection from what was coming next. While the galaxy reeled, humanity's colonies revealed their true faces. For decades, the Concord had looked at human colonies and seen exactly what humanity wanted them to see. Small, vulnerable settlements with minimal defenses, barely worth the effort of conquering. This was a lie. Beneath the surface of every human colony world, behind the facades of mining operations and agricultural stations, humanity had built fortress networks. Orbital defense platforms disguised as weather satellites, planetary shield generators hidden inside mountain ranges, and weapons batteries embedded in the bedrock itself. Colony governors who had spent years playing the role of humble frontier administrators shed their disguises and activated systems that turned their quiet little worlds into death traps for any fleet foolish enough to approach. Phase 3 was called Prometheus Unchained, and it was the phase that broke the galaxy's understanding of what humanity actually was. The Concord had classified Earth as Tier 9, the lowest level of spacefaring civilization, capable of basic interstellar travel and rudimentary energy manipulation. This classification had been based on what humanity had shown them, and humanity had been very careful about what it showed. The truth, the real truth that Director Tanaka and her predecessors had guarded for 40 years, was that humanity had reached Tier 3 capability decades ago. Tier 3 meant mastery over fundamental forces, the ability to manipulate spacetime, to harness energy at stellar scales, to create technologies that the Concord considered theoretical or impossible. Humanity had done all of this in secret, in hidden research stations and classified laboratories scattered across uninhabited systems, that the Concord had never bothered to survey because they contained nothing of apparent value. Now that technology was unleashed. The first weapon the galaxy encountered was the Rift Lance, a device that tore a localized hole in the fabric of spacetime and directed the resulting energy at a target. It did not burn or blast or explode in any conventional sense. It simply erased whatever it was aimed at, pulling matter apart at the subatomic level and scattering it across dimensions. A single Rift Lance could destroy a capital ship in seconds. The second was the ThoughtNet, a quantum-entangled communication and awareness system that connected every human commander, every ship, and every soldier in a web of instantaneous information sharing. While the Concord's forces stumbled blind and deaf, human forces operated with perfect coordination across hundreds of light years, every unit knowing exactly where every other unit was and what it was doing at all. The third, and most terrifying, was the Harvester system. Autonomous drone swarms that descended on disabled enemy fleets, disassembled the ships molecule by molecule, and used the raw materials to build more drones. The more the enemy fought, the stronger the harvesters became. Across the galaxy, alien intelligence agencies scrambled to understand what was happening. They pulled up their files on humanity. Files that said Tier 9. Files that said primitive. Files that said harmless. And they realized that every single assessment they had ever made was wrong. Humanity had never been the weak, eager, overly friendly species that stumbled into the galaxy and just wanted to be liked. That was the mask. Behind the mask was something else entirely. A species that had learned long ago that the universe was not kind, that survival was not guaranteed, and that the best defense was to make sure that anyone who tried to destroy you would lose everything in the attempt. Ambassador Mbanke had been the outstretched hand. Order 66 was the clenched fist. And the galaxy was only now beginning to understand that both had always belonged to the same body. The first 3 days were the worst. Not because of the battles. The battles were shockingly one-sided. But because of the confusion, the disbelief, and the slow, horrifying realization spreading across 4,000 species that the universe they thought they understood had been a comfortable illusion, and humanity had just shattered it. Without the Concord communication network, without coordinated leadership, and without access to the hyperspace junctions, the greatest military coalition in galactic history fractured like glass dropped on stone. Some species tried to fight. The Vrelok's Dominion, a proud warrior culture that had spent centuries bullying smaller species, assembled their home fleet of 600 warships and charged toward the nearest human colony, a small agricultural world called New Meridian. They expected to find a defenseless farming settlement. What they found was a nightmare. New Meridian's orbital defense grid, hidden for 15 years inside what the Vreloks had believed were communication satellites, activated the moment the fleet entered weapons range. The first volley destroyed 80 ships before the Vrelok's admiral even understood he was being fired upon. The second volley crippled 100 more. And then the harvesters came. Clouds of silver drones that poured out of hidden launch bays on the planet's 3 moons, swarming over the damaged ships like insects over fallen fruit. The Vrelok's fleet lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, not a single Vrelok ship remained. Not destroyed in the traditional sense, but disassembled, taken apart piece by machines that did not negotiate and did not accept surrender, and did not stop until there was nothing left but dust and silence. The Vrelok's Dominion surrendered the next morning. They were not the last. The Battle of Thesara Prime happened on the 4th day. The galaxy truly understood the old order was dead. Admiral Cale Draven brought the USN First Fleet out of hiding. 47 warships led by the Erebus, a vessel so large that alien sensors initially classified it as a small moon. The Concord's defense fleet at Thesara Prime was formidable on paper. Over 1,000 ships from dozens of species. But Dark Hand had already crippled their coordination systems, and half their captains could not even communicate with the ship next to them. Draven did not attack immediately. He opened a broadcast channel, not encrypted, not military only, but open to every receiver on the station, and every species watching from across the fragmented network. His face appeared on every screen on Thesara Prime, a weathered human face with tired eyes and a jaw set like iron. "This is Admiral Cale Draven of the United Stellar Navy," he said. "4 days ago, your inner circle murdered our ambassador on your assembly floor. She was unarmed. She was speaking about peace, and you killed her in front of the entire galaxy." He paused. "I am not here to destroy this station. I am not here to kill civilians. I am here to make sure that every being on Thesara Prime, and every being watching this broadcast, understands one thing. We sent you our best, and you sent her back dead, and now you will deal with the rest of us." The Concord Defense Fleet tried to form a battle line. The Erebus fired a single rift lance. The beam carved through space like a finger drawn through water, and where it touched the Concord formation, ships simply ceased to exist, not exploding, not burning, just vanishing, as if they had never been there at all. The gap in the formation was 3 kilometers wide. The remaining Concord ships broke and ran. Draven let them go. He did not need to destroy the fleet. The message had been delivered. The First Fleet took up position around Thesara Prime, and the Concord Assembly, the same body that had applauded Mbanke's murder 4 days ago, found itself trapped inside its own capital, surrounded by the species it had dismissed as primitive. On the assembly floor, in the exact spot where Mbanke had fallen, a holographic projection appeared. Her face, her silver earthpin, her warm eyes. Draven's voice echoed through the hall once more. Look at her. Look at what you did. Remember her face, because she is the reason you are still alive. She believed in mercy, and we are honoring that belief today. But do not mistake this mercy for weakness, because the next time we come to this station, we will not be bringing messages. While Thesara Prime reeled, the real punishment fell on those who had orchestrated the assassination. The scouring of the Zelun hegemony began on day 5 and lasted 72 hours. Voroth Zelun species, the Thesari, controlled the most powerful individual military in the Concord, a fleet of over 10,000 warships built over centuries of conquest and intimidation. But those 10,000 ships were scattered across dozens of systems, unable to communicate, unable to coordinate, and unable to reach each other through the locked hyperspace junctions. Human stealth fleets found them one group at a time. The harvester swarms did the rest. In 3 days, the Thesari war machine, the most feared military force in the galaxy for 300 years, was reduced to scrap metal drifting in the void. Zelun himself fled from Thesara Prime in a private shuttle as the first fleet arrived, running to a hidden bunker on a frozen moon in an uncharted system. He would not be found for months. But his empire was gone. Meanwhile, the Karath Collective, the insectoid hive mind that had enthusiastically cheered Mbanke's execution, faced a different kind of reckoning. The Karath had embraced human technology more than almost any other species. Their vast hive cities ran on human-designed power systems. Their food production relied on human agricultural technology, and their communication networks used human relay software. When Order 66 activated, all of it went dark. The hive cities, enormous structures housing billions of Karath, lost power, lost climate control, lost everything. The Karath did not have backup systems because they had never thought they would need them. Why would they, when the human systems worked so perfectly? Within 3 days, their civilization was collapsing. They surrendered unconditionally on day 5, and their final transmission to Earth was a single word in their clicking language that translated roughly to mercy. But humanity was not a mindless force of destruction, and this was what separated Order 66 from simple revenge. The 4 species that had voted against the assassination, the Pelori, the Peleri, Athkari, the Luminari, and the Joroth, were not touched. Their systems continued to function, their colonies were left alone, and on day 6, human aid ships appeared at their borders, carrying food, medicine, and engineers. The Pelori ambassador, the same one who had sat in horrified silence as Mbanke was killed, received a personal message from Director Tanaka. "You tried to stop it," the message read. "We know, we remember who our friends are, and we protect them." The Pelori ambassador wept, not from fear, but from relief, and from a deep aching sadness for the galaxy that could have avoided all of this, if it had simply listened to one kind woman in a back row seat. Aboard the Erebus, Admiral Draven stood alone in his quarters after the Battle of Thesara Prime. The lights were dim. The ship hummed around him. On his desk sat a holographic portrait of Ambassador Mbanke, not an official photo, but a candid shot of her laughing at some diplomatic reception, her head thrown back, her eyes bright with joy. Draven looked at it for a long time. He had met her once, years ago, at a briefing where she had argued passionately that Order 66 should never be used, that it was a monstrous thing that would destroy everything humanity claimed to stand for. He had disagreed with her then. He was not sure he disagreed with her now. "I am sorry, Alara," he said quietly to the portrait. "You deserved better than this. They all did." He turned off the hologram, straightened his uniform, and walked back to the bridge. The war was not over yet, and the galaxy still had lessons to learn. 6 months after Order 66, the galaxy was a different place. The Galactic Concord, the institution that had governed the stars for millennia, no longer existed. Its assembly halls were empty, its military was shattered, and its great bureaucratic machinery had ground to a halt like a clock with its gears ripped out. The war, if it could even be called that, had lasted less than 3 weeks. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. That was important to understand, and it was a distinction that many species struggled with in the months that followed. Humanity had simply broken every tool the galaxy had used to threaten it, and then it had stopped. There was no occupation. There were no human governors installed on alien worlds. There were no demands for tribute or submission. There was only silence, followed by an invitation. The invitation came from Earth, from a new body called the Terran Accord, established not as a replacement for the Concord, but as something fundamentally different. The Concord had been built on hierarchy. Strong species ruled, weak species obeyed, and everyone knew their place. The Terran Accord was built on one principle. No species would ever again be ranked, classified, or dismissed because of how old they were or how powerful their fleet was. Membership was voluntary. Every species had an equal vote, and humanity did not place itself at the top. This confused the galaxy more than anything else. They had watched humanity dismantle the most powerful civilization in galactic history in 18 days, and now these same humans were offering to sit at a round table as equals. Some species called it a trick, a gentle mask hiding the same iron fist that had turned the HFY war machine into scrap metal. Others called it weakness, an inability to follow through on the dominance they had clearly earned. But a growing number of species, especially those who had been crushed under the Concord's boot for centuries, called it something else. They called it hope. The first species to join the Terran Accord were the 4 who had opposed the assassination: the Pelori, the Athkari, the Luminari, and the Jorath. The Pelori ambassador, now recognized as one of the few alien leaders who had shown moral courage when it mattered, stood before the first Accord assembly and spoke in her soft, fluid voice. For 300 years, we obeyed the Concord because we were afraid, she said. We watched injustice and said nothing because speaking was dangerous. When the humans came, their ambassador showed us that speaking was not just possible, but necessary. We failed her when she needed us most, and we will carry that shame forever. But we will not fail again. Dozens of species followed in the weeks after. Some came eagerly, grateful for the chance to escape the Concord's shadow, came cautiously, watching humanity's every move for signs of the trap they were certain was coming. The trap never came. Instead, humanity did something that baffled the galaxy's political analysts and military strategists. They declassified everything. Every hidden technology, every secret weapon system, every Tier 3 advancement that had been developed in hidden laboratories over 4 decades. All of it was made available to any species that joined the Accord. The Rift Lances, the ThoughtNet, the Harvester blueprints, all of it shared freely. When asked why, Director Tanaka gave a simple answer at a press conference that was broadcast across the galaxy. We hid these things because we had to, she said. We built weapons in secret because we lived in a galaxy that judged us by our weakness and would have destroyed us if it knew our strength. That galaxy is gone now, and we do not want to live in its shadow anymore. Secrets are poison, and we have been carrying this poison for too long. Not everyone accepted this generosity easily. The Karath Collective, whose civilization had nearly collapsed when human technology was shut down, joined the Accord, but could barely look their human counterparts in the eye. Their new ambassador, a young Karath female, whose clicking voice trembled when she spoke, stood before the assembly and said something that no Karath had ever said to another species. "We are sorry," she said. "We cheered when your ambassador died. We called you vermin, and we celebrated your pain. And when our cities went dark, and our children were hungry, you sent ships to feed us before we even asked. We do not understand your kind, but we want to learn." The trial of Vorath Zelen took place 4 months after Order 66. He had been found in his hidden bunker on a frozen moon, alone except for a handful of loyal guards who surrendered the moment human soldiers appeared. Brought to Thessera Prime, to the same assembly hall where he had ordered Mbanke's execution. And he stood before a tribunal of 12 judges, 6 human and 6 alien. He was old and diminished, his iron scales dull, and his amber eyes empty of the cold fire that had once made entire species tremble. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He did not deny it. When given the chance to speak in his own defense, he said only one thing: "I did what was necessary to preserve the natural order. I would do it again." The tribunal found him guilty of murder, conspiracy, and crimes against galactic civilization. The sentence was life imprisonment on a barren moon with no possibility of release. He was not executed. This decision was controversial. Many species, including some humans, wanted him dead. But the tribunal's ruling was clear, and the reason was carved into the judgment itself. Ambassador Alera Mbanke was a lifelong opponent of the death penalty. She believed that even the worst among us deserve the chance to reflect on what they have done. We honor her conviction, even in the punishment of the man who silenced her. The memorial was built on the floor of the assembly hall, in the exact spot where Mbanke had fallen. It was a statue carved from white stone quarried on earth, a figure of a woman standing tall, with her hand extended outward in greeting, her face calm, her eyes kind. She wore the silver earth pin on her collar. Beneath the statue, an inscription was carved in 600 languages, one for every species that had joined the Terran Accord. The inscription read, "She came in peace. Remember what happened when you refused it." Delegations from across the galaxy came to see it. Some stood in silence, some wept. Some left offerings, flowers, crystals, written prayers in languages that humanity was still learning to read. Tanaka visited the memorial, once, alone, in the quiet hours before the station's artificial dawn. She stood before the statue and looked up at the stone face of the woman she had failed to protect. "I kept my promise, Ilara," she whispered. "I kept them safe. I just wish I could have kept you safe too." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small data chip, the master key for Order 66, the code that controlled every contingency, every sleeper program, every hidden weapon. She placed it at the base of the statue. The next day, she announced the formal decommission of Order 66 and all its associated protocols. The contingency files were sealed, the sleeper programs were deactivated, and the hidden weapons caches were dismantled, under joint human-alien supervision. A reporter asked her the question that everyone in the galaxy wanted answered. Will Earth ever build something like Order 66 again? Tanaka was quiet for a long time. "I hope we never have to," she said finally. But hope is not a strategy. Admiral Cale Draven retired 3 months after the Accord was established. He did not attend the ceremony. He did not give interviews. He simply filed his resignation, packed a single bag, and disappeared. He resurfaced weeks later in a small coastal village in West Africa, Ilara Mbanke's homeland. He bought a small house with a view of the ocean and began tending a garden, something he had never done before in his life. The locals did not know who he was, and he did not tell them. He grew tomatoes and peppers and a stubborn lemon tree that refused to bear fruit no matter what he did. And he spent his evenings sitting on the porch, watching the waves come in. Sometimes the village children would come by and ask the quiet old man with the sad eyes to tell them a story. He always said the same thing: "I am not the storyteller. Here before me," and she was much better at it than I will ever be. Across the galaxy, the Terran Accord grew. Species that had spent centuries under the Concord's heel found their voices for the first time. Trade routes reopened, cultural exchanges resumed, and a new generation of diplomats, human and alien alike, began the slow, difficult, wonderful work of building something better than what had come before. But in every alien war college, in every strategic planning room, in every quiet conversation between leaders who remembered what had happened, one lesson was taught above all others. It was written on classroom walls and carved into the hulls of warships and whispered by admirals to their officers on the first day of their service. Never mistake humanity's kindness for weakness. They sent us a poet, and we sent her back in a coffin. They responded by sending everything else. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and in a small garden, by the sea, an old soldier watered his lemon tree and hoped, truly hoped, that it would never need to be taught again.